Despite lots of hype around spatial computing, Apple's initial jump into the space has been met with a lot of meh. As we ponder the future of spatial computing, will it become a tech nirvana or a tech nightmare? We're going to discuss both sides of the issue on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. We're also happy to have back on the show Mike Bechtel. He is the Chief Futurist and Managing Director at Deloitte Consulting. Welcome back, Mike.
Hey, Keith, it's great to be back with you. How you doing?
Good. You're one of my favorite guests because you're so enthusiastic and optimistic about this, and so I'm going to need this optimism on this episode, I think, because there's a lot on the other side where there's a little bit of cynicism, I would say, or lack of interest is another thing that we have to kind of fight. But before we get started, I wanted to talk about what you guys produced. This was about a month or two ago. You published a new series called Dichotomies, which takes a pros and cons approach to a technology. Through the use of speculative fiction in the paper, you highlight 6 different characters as they navigate the world of 2030 in professional, personal, and public scenarios. Each section then includes both a positive, which is the allure of the technology, and a negative, which raises a lot of concerns around this technology. So, before we jump into what you talked about in the world of spatial computing, why was it important for you guys to take this character-driven approach to explain this rather than just listing out the pros and cons? Is it just because it's more entertaining to read, or is it maybe something about technology that leads to a science fiction type storytelling?
Well, Keith, one of the things that I suppose I've experienced viscerally in my 25 plus years of swimming around with all things newfangled is that, there's a lot of white papers out there, and there's a lot of research with plenty of quant and plenty of stake, if you will. But when we meet with clients as Deloitte around the world, the number one thing people always want to skip to is show me the case studies.
Right.
Tell me the real client stories and how that can, make it real for me. And the irony is when you're dealing with futuristic or emerging tech, there definitionally aren't any yet. They don't exist.
Right.
And so it occurred to our team a couple of years back. He said, you know what? What's that old quote, right? Never let truth get in the way of a good story. We said, well, what if we could create case studies that were speculative? And, how's that for wordplay? If you get just more direct, what if we made them up?
Yeah.
And what we found was if you tell a story, suddenly people don't just think about it, they feel it, they want to hear more, they lean in. And Keith, the second realization we had was it's not enough to just do one. If you show only what could go wrong, then you're a doomsdayer.
Yep.
If you show only what could go right, then it feels a little bit saccharine, a little bit, fake.
Yeah, then you're a homer. Then you're a,
Well, right. And if you try to overload 20 pounds of pros and cons in any one story, then it's bad writing.
Yeah.
And so where we kind of landed was let's write a portfolio, a compendium, if we're going to be, English nerds, of short stories that visit what could go right and what might go wrong. And taken together, what we're finding is that our clients around the world, they say, okay, this is starting to make sense.
How dare you make a white paper interesting, Mike? All right. So, before we jump into some of the specific scenarios, because I do want to talk about some of the stories that you did to highlight the world of spatial computing and VR and AR and all this other stuff. Before you get to that point, there are a lot of timelines that you discuss. And so, for example, you discuss something that can happen now within the next 2 to 3 years, and then within 2 years, and then 5+ years. So, for example, for the now section, you're saying spatial computing can unlock new dimensions of operating, and then you have a big if. Custom high fidelity 3D digital renderings can be rolled out quickly. So, if someone's reading this white paper, do you feel like that this is something that has to happen in the industry now and is one of the biggest priorities to get kind of the ball rolling?
Yeah, well, Keith, as we were researching this space, which, at Deloitte, we call the whole space unlimited reality. But, whether it's spatial computing, metaverse, you call it what you want. But
yeah.
There's there's a tendency to just look at the front end, right? The mind immediately jumps to several $1,000 headsets, goggles, and glasses. But the truth is, none of this is worth a lick unless you have content to decorate that virtual universe. And so one of the things we're starting to see, both here at Deloitte, but also just generally, is AI, as it has a tendency to do here in 2024, is poking its head up as a sort of interior decorator for spatial computing, right? Because if you think about it, creating virtual objects, scenes, offices, landscapes, everything, to do that manually it's like building the whole planet all over again. But if you're able to say, okay, let's use generative AI to start, conjure me up a room like a genie from a lamp that features a desk and this color paint and that color wall, suddenly you get a real speed to production. So I think that first frontier we're starting to see is companies leaning into automation to furnish a space worth visiting. Because if you don't have an interesting digital space to go to, you ain't got much.
Yeah. And so are you seeing companies in this space inching ahead on some of these, not knowing whether or not the result of this work will result in anything? Because again, they might do all this stuff and then there's still no one to play in this space that you've created, right?
Yeah, Keith, again, back to my being halfway between geek and geezer. I'll tell you, I remember, and I am not to put any broad assumptions on you, brother, but we probably remember that, AR, VR demos ain't new.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going to the mall in Chicago, called an area called, at the time it was called, North Point, something like that. But you would pay $10 to hop into big Rock'em Sock'em robots. I think it was Mech Warrior or something, blasting each other. Loki Prime for me. But the punchline being, VR used to be an expensive, situated toy. Gradually, it started to feel like a mobile toy. My son living his best life, sweaty mess playing Beat Saber for the last 5 years. What we're starting to see is it's just turning the corner towards being a tool. And so to answer your question, we're starting to see, our clients are making meaningful moves into simpler, use case driven experiences that, it's baby steps at first, but it's the gradual recognition that we got to get beyond this proliferation of 16:9 rectangular screens every gosh darn place.
Right.
Because if I've learned anything on the interface layer, simple tends to win. And when these headsets are smaller, they feel like glasses and all the rest, we'll see them more as a rescue from 15 screens in our life and less as a cumbersome get up on our head. Yeah.
All right. So we've got to build the worlds first, it feels like you're saying.
Yeah.
And then the next thing within the 2 years, that you're saying spatial computing socializes the spatial web. This will happen if you start getting methods, regulations, and personalization, privacy, security. Those are all in place. This makes my head pop up a little bit and go, well, regulations and privacy usually lag behind the development of these technologies as well. So why is this in the middle rather than kind of near at the end? Or, is it still, you're going to see kind of a Wild West and then the laws will come in once people see the results of that Wild West, correct?
Well, Keith, if you remember right before smartphones really took off, right? If we time travel back to right around 2006, we had something called Second Life.
Oh yeah, everybody. Yeah, if you've lived long enough, you'll remember Second Life. That's the big.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because people always wonder, like, why did that thing go quiet? And the answer was because we were all smitten with the arrival of iPhones and Androids and such. But I'll tell you, the challenge in that environment tended to be, you're dealing with individual corporate entities, individual local hosting. Cloud elasticity hadn't really come into its own yet. And so you got into this paradox, right, where the more popular something was on that old platform, the slower it worked and the worse time you had. And so it was almost like it was the opposite of viral. Like, hey, check this thing out. Oh, we crashed it. Well, here's the thing. Most most adult visions, right, of our spatial computing future or a metaverse future or an unlimited reality future acknowledge that it's going to need to be distributed. It's going to need to involve some degree of self-sovereign data, which is geek speak for, control of your own digital assets. And you're going to need to have really a la carte notions of privacy, transactional trust, right? Like, am I giving my data just this once to get just that thing, or am I giving it, carte blanche forever?
Yeah.
So I think when I mentioned that there's a lot more going on here than just the headsets, spatial web is really that whole notion of, man, what's the plumbing going to be?
Right.
To allow for e-commerce, transactions, privacy, data behind that glass.
And so why, I guess, why is it still in the middle here? Will people know when it's time to roll out these regulations, or is it just going to happen organically as people get into it and realize, well, wait, no, this is not right. We need better rules around this.
I think, as Deloitte, one of the things that we get to see, to be completely honest, is, we work in multiple sectors, including the public sector, and in multiple geographies. And there's that old quote you've heard me use, right? The future's already here, just not very evenly distributed. One of the things we're seeing around the world, whether it's in Europe, some cases in the Middle East, is that there is an increasing momentum around data privacy, data rights, data management, data flagging, and it's what's interesting is it's starting to come up in a somewhat more proactive way. Like in the same way that GPDR got out in front of what data can be saved, leveraged, or not out in Europe, the recently passed AI Act out there is out to do a lot of similar things.
Yeah.
And so I think what I'd say generally is it'll still be a dance, and it'll still be a public-private dance, but I don't know that people are going to, wake up one day and say, oh, it's safe to swim, let's get out there. I think it's going to be household name organizations we're comfortable doing business with saying, hey, this is encrypted, that's protected. If you trust the rest of our ecosystem, take a dip. The water's not. The water's fine.
And then you also mentioned that in 5 or more years that spatial computing will blend the digital and physical world, but if only it's accessible enough to reach widespread adoption. Does this mean widespread adoption around the world or just within the U.S.? I mean, we're pretty U.S.-centric here. Does the technology need to be popular here first before it can get there? Because it does feel like, you mentioned Europe with a lot of its regulations. It feels like they're ahead on a lot of this data privacy stuff. So why not have maybe the VR spatial computing boom start there? And then right. I'd be happy to allow them to have it take off first. But it also feels like there's always a US-centric boom that has to happen for technology to take off.
Yeah,
maybe it's just me. Yeah.
Well, Keith, one of the things that I think we've been recognizing and wrestling with in this work as we started laying out again the allures and the concerns, as we call them.
Yeah.
Is that if we think the digital divide, that old term typically applied to bandwidth, right? If we think the digital divide is a doozy when you're talking about megabits versus kilobits. Imagine a world where some people are literally able to participate in a reality and other people aren't. I'll give you an example. I was talking with a Metropolitan Transport Authority. I won't tell you which city.
Okay.
It's somewhere in this big woolly world. And they were recognizing that to put 16 by 9, printed maps on the train, that would be a really 1990s thing to do. To put 16 by 9 LCD screens on the train, that would be a really 2010s thing to do, right? In terms of maps, as it were.
Sure.
And that the future-friendly move seemed to be, well, let's just have a big clean space and people will sort of BYOG, bring their own glasses, and we'll expect our riders to project their own view of the map when they need it and how they need it. And I asked what felt like a pretty innocuous question. I said, well, what about people who don't, have glasses and stuff, man? To which they said, oh my goodness, yeah, well, we're going to have to design around that.
Yeah.
And so the takeaway, inspired both by the fact that this was involving trains and digital equity, we said, we're going to need to mind the gap, right? Mind the digital gap and make sure that people are brought along, because in the same way that phones feel like a borderline digital right these days, so too will a lot of these spatial computing affordances.
Okay. All right. I don't know if that answered my question though. Like, do you still think it's going to happen in the U.S. before it happens in other places, or could it rise in a different location?
Well,
or or are you going to see it? Maybe maybe you'll see it without in a specific country. You'll just see it from people who can afford it versus people who can't afford it.
Yeah.
And then bring them along, like we saw with the phones and the mobile phones.
Right. If the limiting reagent, not that we need to bring chemistry back into this, high school chemistry, gosh help us, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, but if the limiting reagent proves to be the gear, right, the tech and the capex, then there's reason to believe that the U.S. will be the center of gravity, because that's where a lot of this sort of pioneering prototypes, experimentation are happening. If the limiting reagent ends up being a little more on the regulatory side, right, rules, tools, and schools, as we sometimes say, then yeah, there's a lot of reason to believe that Europe could be out in front.
Okay. So I want to get into some of these scenarios, because that was the purpose of talking about talking with you about a lot of these things. And you present them in the white paper as mini stories of people within either a professional setting or they're in their personal life, and then in the public space. So then each story shows you a positive aspect of life within this futuristic world of spatial computing, but it also shows a negative. So we'll start with the professional stories. And the first story from a positive side is a retired factory engineer who is helping former colleagues via this headset on fixing a digital twin of a rocket launch scenario. And I think most people can understand, what that is. It's like, okay, he's putting on the goggles. He's then saying, oh, well, you got to do this, this, and this, and then you'll fix that whatever's wrong with the rocket.
Right.
In the negative scenario, in the professional space, you have a factory worker who is experiencing a lot of over surveillance of coworkers. But then they also have some robots who are supposed to help protect workers, and they just get in the way during this emergency scenario.
Yeah.
To be honest, I enjoyed the negative story better.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I worked in the robotics space and I saw examples of that when covering robotics. And one of the famous stories that someone from MIT told me once was, it's great that we can program a robot to go from point A to point B to deliver a cup of coffee. But if they pass someone in the hallway that has tripped and fallen, that robot's going to just try to go around them rather than to stop and try to help. And that's the difference between humans and robots. If you were a regular worker delivering coffee to a coworker and you saw someone sitting, falling on the ground, you would help them. You would stop what you were doing. So that story had a better impact on me, having experienced, that story before. So can you tell me a little bit about, some of the technologies or reasons behind both of those stories?
Yeah. No, you're not the first who's recognized that a little bit of crisis goes a long way in building narrative interest.
Well,
right?
it's the whole conflict. All stories have conflict in them. Otherwise, they're just not even good stories. It's just a tale.
They're marketing brochures
or anecdotes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, on the concern front, and speaking about the coffee delivery robot idea you just mentioned, I always thought, I'd long heard that one of the best descriptions, right, of AI, right, isn't the usual tropes of HAL 9000 or the Terminator, the Matrix. That those are interesting, right, because of the crisis, but that a better description would be the good old Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? The idea that those brooms, they weren't out to create malice. They were just doing their jobs, man.
Yeah.
Don't get in the way of those brooms. And I thought, oh goodness, it's an instructive frame for automation. But starting with maybe that concern story, we talk about the woman we feature is named Caroline, and You know what's interesting there, to answer your question on tech, we sort of start that story, and these are all one pagers, by the way.
Yeah,
we'll make
these are not novel-like stories here.
No, not novelettes. No, not even novellas. But Caroline is asked by her supervisor, who's very much a human, Jonathan, that for team efficiency purposes, she needs to punch in to the smart glasses of her colleagues, right? The people that work for her subordinates. Mm-hmm. And what's so interesting is we realize that in a world where you see what your people see, it's not just like cartoon mustache twisting villainy surveillance. Right. It's accidental oopsie surveillance. Like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to be in your eyes while you were reading your text from your better half, right?
Okay.
And so one of the ideas that popped out, and it's part of the reason we do these stories, Keith, is that it wasn't until we wrote about that character that we realized that unintentional oopsie mindlessness might be as malignant as, again, like malicious Orwellian stuff.
Yeah. So
that was one big takeaway, is if you see what I see, then it's not just villainy, it's accidents.
In this case, when you were writing the story, or when I don't know who whoever on your team was writing the story, was there an intention, or maybe unintentional, where you're trying to explain this technology as, is there an intention for they wanted this to be good, in like the company wants this punching in, or for efficiency's sake, and then you take that good intention and then say, well, here's the bad part of that good intention. Well, because I don't understand. Yeah, like this over surveillance thing seems bad when you just use the word over surveillance, but there is got to be some good intentions. Otherwise, a company wouldn't necessarily deploy this, right?
Well, and Keith, that's you're getting right down to the kind of the meat of the matter, or what maybe we could call it the meta meat. No double pun intended. But here's what I mean. There's this old Arthur C. Clarke line that any sufficiently advanced tech is indistinguishable from magic, right? Well, yeah, if it's used mindfully, for sure. Like let's make some miracles, right? What's interesting is, on the flip side, you've got what our team has come to call the malicious uses. Right, that's typically the province of cybersecurity professionals, forensics experts, Department of Defense types, real baddies doing real bad stuff. Okay, that's its own animal.
Right.
What we found, to your kind of point, is that mindlessness, just unintentional oversights, they kind of metastasize into worse than mindlessness, worse than mere noise. They become malignant. And so, to your point, in the Caroline story, our team, our lead writer and editor, Abhijit, he's imagining that, sure, there's a lot of utility and a lot of helpfulness being able to pop into any camera in the joint, and so why not any person in the joint? Mm-hmm. But it's not until you write that out that pardon the sugary language here, but it isn't until you've been in those shoes and started to wrestle with that lived experience where you go, oh man, there's some really surprising stuff that could go south here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we're doing this so we can get out as leaders, get out in front of it, make sure that's not allowed.
Okay. So I want to go to the next one. This is the personal one. This is the personal example. On the positive side, you have a disabled veteran who goes grocery shopping and gets assistance along with personalized ads. I like how you added that to the personalized advertising as a positive.
Yeah.
And then is treated quickly by his AI. So I guess this person now has a personalized AI with them. When he experiences a PTSD moment in the grocery store. And so I think the takeaway is that you'll have this personalized grocery store experience, you'll have an AI, but then if something goes wrong during that, you'll also have the ability to treat it quickly. Is that the takeaway on the positive one?
Yeah, and just another quick wrinkle that we wrestled with and got familiar with is we spend so much time talking about augmented reality, more, right?
Yeah.
But one of the concepts that we pulled out, in part with awareness from our fellow futurist Amy Webb, was this recognition of diminished reality. That part of the value prop of some of these tools could be throttling down the noise and distractions and creating a little more sanity in a world that sounds louder every gosh darn day.
Yeah, it feels like the trope that you see in a lot of these augmented reality, whether you're watching a movie or you're experiencing a tech demo, is that you put on the glasses and all of a sudden, like everywhere, you just see ad,
Yeah, right,
buy me, click this, push this, and you're going to be walking around the streets doing this all the time, and then someone's going to look at you going, oh yeah, he's got the headset on or he's got the glasses on because he's doing this. Just in the same way that like when Bluetooth headsets came out and you couldn't tell if someone was wearing a headset and they're walking down the street and they're just mumbling to themselves, and you're like either they're mumbling to themselves and you should avoid them, or they're on a phone call, and now it's just accepted that if you see someone doing that, you're like, yeah, they're on the phone.
100%. Yeah. Diminished reality, or like the creation of the right reality, which increasingly is going to be less distraction. There's a lot of virtue and allure to that for sure.
Yeah. And then on your negative story, again, this is taking that advertisement thing to the extreme, or at least to the next. You're just turning it up a little bit on the volume button. Is about a woman who is addicted to technology, and she continues to receive advertisements, and then ends up falling victim to an election scammer who hacks into her smart contacts, extorting money and campaign donations. And then I think at the end of the story, she's finally, saved by or she probably lost a lot of money, but someone realizes that she was being scammed. So again, this is how something that could be good to help people in a store can now be used in a scamming sense. That seems
Yeah, and Keith, I would tell you with that one, we had a lot of fun with that one, because what I think inspired some of that was this recognition that, okay, we know that in a social media world, one of the downsides, right, well chronicled, is this idea of the echo chamber, right? People living in their a bubble of their own algorithmic choosing,
right?
And what we recognized was that in the same way that you could create, say, for that positive story a moment ago, right? Carlos, the veteran, in the same way you could create a more protected, diminished reality that helped him, better function, that taken to an extreme, you could create a completely fabricated reality and somebody, dissociated from not just other information, but other sights and sounds and smells.
Yeah.
And so, this one takes things out, I think, a little further on the, techno believability continuum, but it's really just to make that point that if you think echo chambers are problematic on little rectangles, imagine when it's your full optical feed through a contact lens.
We'll move on to the next one, which is the public space. And your positive scenario and story is about a woman who is on a tour of Japan, and she is rerouted to her tourist destination through the help of some local residents. That's a little bit, it's probably that way in Japan. It wouldn't be here in Brooklyn or New York.
The benefit of a global team and global research, right?
Yeah, good job picking a different country there. And then on the negative side, you have a college student discovering that blocking abilities end up making him more isolated, and an in-person meeting with a mentor is now done virtually. And then he notices that the person that he was meeting with created an editable reality to make his skin color lighter. That's some potential concerns as well, as being able to, as a user, you could change your appearance, but then it's the person on the other side. Like I could change so I can change my own appearance, but you're saying that in the future, if I was talking to Mike here, I could change you to look however I wanted to make you look, right? Is that kind of what this editable reality is? Right.
I mean, there's that great old line from, I think it was a myth testing show, right? Where it was, I reject your reality and substitute my own. And 15, 20 years ago, that was hilarious because, of course, one can't do that.
Yeah.
But what we're starting to see is that spatial computing opens up the possibility of something we might call editable realities, where, I'm not so into, this birthmark on my chin, so I'll take that off for you. But you picked up on it, right? I'm not so into the birthmark on his chin, so I'll take that off for me. there's I think a real risk of, in data science we call it overfitting the curve, right? Where you make something so perfect for yourself that before you know it, you're a greenhouse flower that can't function in the cold hard world. And that's not meant to sound like a political statement as much as it is a recognition that customizations taken to the nth degree beget fragility.
Yeah. Well, what I found interesting about this was that I understand that any user of a technology, and we can do this on Zoom, I could put filters on my face so that you don't see my face and you see like an avatar of a cat. You could do the same thing, and you can, and we just do this whole conversation as two cats talking to each other. But if I decide that I was like, well, I don't like cats, and so I'm going to change Mike's avatar to a dog, that doesn't feel like I have the right to do that. But it feels like that whatever data regulations need to happen should be, I get the right to choose on how I present myself to the world, not the recipient. And you're saying that maybe we will have the future to do that on our own and blur those lines?
Well, yeah, correct. And I think that's where governance comes in a big way. Digital rights management, terms that can feel a little abstract, right? Like you and I've joked, Keith, before that, when you hear the word triple ledger, I don't know about you, but I feel myself starting to fall asleep. But
I've never even heard that phrase before, triple ledger.
Right. You're like, oh, here comes boring.
Okay.
But here's the thing. When somebody talks about, say, self-sovereign data, it can feel the same way, like, oh, brother, here we go.
Okay.
But when you say, no, for example, right, the ability to edit somebody's third-person digital representation without their consent, you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's not cool.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the business case for this whole series, and frankly, why we think fiction, right? Like let me say it once. We at Deloitte believe that fiction is a vehicle for business value, because even though it feels like made up stories, and they are, they bring us to these places we wouldn't think about if we didn't.
Yeah. Like again, a lot of these scenarios did feel like you're going in the extreme in one direction or the other. Was that intentional that you did want to get to the you didn't necessarily go the full range. You do kind of keep things in the middle and pro and a con. But was that intentional just to point out, because again, in a narrative sense, maybe some of these scenarios wouldn't have happened. There, as an editor, I would have been like, yeah, but what about this, and this, and maybe you should have had this, and rearrange that story to make it a little bit more entertaining, rather than no, we're trying to make a point here about the technology.
I think part of it, Keith, was this recognition that there's this old idea that innovation loves constraints. Right, you tell somebody, think of something clever, they'll stumble and stutter.
Yeah.
Say, like, think of a clever solution to a problem here, and you have these 6 toothpicks, go. Right, and then they will. Well, by guardrailing, a very sugary and a very sour extreme, what we're able to do with our clients, and kind of getting down to business here.
Yeah.
You sit down, imagine these as simple and unexpectedly readable pre-reads to a board meeting, right? You come into that board meeting, you've established the north and south frontier. Then you're really well positioned to have an adult kind of leadership discussion about, okay, how are we going to shoot the curl and get enough of that sugar,
right,
but avoid as much of that sour as we can? And that's where it goes from being toy to tool.
Yeah.
Because that's where we find that our clients get the most value, is they say, okay, now that I have a sense of the kind of the low and high pass filter, let's get down to business.
Do you get a sense that you could do future white papers like this around other technologies, or was it just something about spatial computing because it is so sci-fi-ish? Because I can't see me reading one about blockchain, for example. Maybe you could, or
I take that as a dare.
Enterprise resource planning apps of the future. Or digital transformation platforms, cloud-based stuff.
Right. You had me at hello with the blockchain one, but yeah, ERP would be a proper challenge.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, please. I maybe you should skip that one.
Yeah, no. What I would tell you is this is actually, Keith, the third in a series.
Oh, okay. So you've already done a couple. All right.
Yeah, we came out of the gates about a year and a half ago with explorations around biometrics.
Okay.
Right? And we did that as like so many series, right? It started as a one-off request, like, hey, give me a sense. We had a client say, give me the sense of what might go right and what could go wrong, right? With ideas like implantable, identification, fingerprints, iris scanning, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Our second issue, surprise, surprise, was around generative AI.
Right.
And it was really, what was fun about that one was, it's fun when you're in emerging tech or futures work to point back and say, we thought of that, right before you started seeing it in the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
But we did, and it was great. Spatial just happened to be next in the queue, given the conversational mass, what with, work out of Meta, Apple, and others earlier this year. Yeah.
So in the future, we will see, as long as it's an emerging technology, I would assume that you could probably do something like this.
Yeah, we go all in on.
Yeah.
I like to joke that our team's a mile wide and a mile out, which is to say that if it's something that you haven't necessarily heard enough about yet, that would be good fodder for the dichotomies treatment.
So do you keep these characters around for, in your head, or are they gone? Like, is that, and Mike, when does the movie come out? Like around this?
I really, so just to geek out with you for a hot second, Keith. So we do have universe building within the dyads. I don't know if you noticed that Carlos, the veteran with the health episode, ended up being the one who rescued poor Allie from her political dystopia.
I did not notice that, but
yes.
But thank you for bringing that up. So now you've created a Deloitte cinematic universe here.
There is a Deloitte cinematic universe for these people, but you've just opened my eyes to the idea of continuity over time. So get ready, Carlos
could come back in a different, when he's exploring the world of autonomous robots.
I love it.
Or at least give the people that were in that negative scenario, give them the positive one next time, because I want to start caring about all these characters, and then we'll start animating all this stuff later. Anyway, that's some free advice for you, Mike. There you go.
I love it.
It was a very entertaining white paper, Mike, and again, thanks for bringing this up, because I think a lot of these issues do need to be brought up, so that we can avoid going to one extreme or the other. So it's good for viewers and even on the consumer side of just knowing what could happen and being aware of that, so that if it does go down that negative path, you can be like, no, wait, we need to come back to the center here.
And Keith, the pleasure's been all mine. And I would tell you, when this stuff feels a little out there or a little not yet ready for prime time, I'll tell you, a quick check-in in my case with my 12-year-old, watching him in a massively multiplayer online game and seeing somebody changing his reality, or somebody engaging in some of these behaviors, it gets me thinking that some of these tomorrows are low-key todays for our kids already.
Right. So yeah, I mean, some really good stuff. So again, Mike, thanks again for being on the show, and I'm already booking you for the predictions episode at the end of the year. So when we start looking at 2025, oh my gosh, that's the future. We're gonna have you back on the show. Back when I was a kid, 2025 was like, oh no, I'll never be able to make it to 2025, and now here we are. So yeah, yay.
For real.
Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any extra thoughts you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.